This is the Pulitzer on the Road podcast, connecting Pulitzer Prize winners with audiences around the country. I'm your guide, Nicole Carroll. I'm a member of the Pulitzer Prize Board and a faculty member at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. Each spring, 23 Pulitzer Prizes are awarded for distinguished journalism, books, drama, and music. On this podcast, we talk with many of the winners and hear the stories behind their prize-winning work. The 2024 Pulitzer Prize for Breaking News Reporting was awarded to Lookout Santa Cruz, a small digital news site covering communities in and around the coastal California city of Santa Cruz. The Pulitzer Prize Board commended the staff for their, quote, detailed and nimble community-focused coverage of catastrophic flooding and mudslides that displaced thousands of residents and destroyed more than 1,000 homes and businesses. On this episode of Pulitzer on the Road, we're going to take you back in time to the night the first of these destructive storms hit Santa Cruz. It's New Year's Eve, the last day of 2022. And while Santa Cruz is known for its beaches and sunny weather, today is not a normal day.
The really sort of big storm started the day of New Year's Eve, December 31st.
Tamsin McMahon is the managing editor of Lookout Santa Cruz. The news site had been around for a couple of years, and there were 6 reporters on staff at the time. They covered everything from local elections to college football games to restaurant openings. Tamsin was the only one working that New Year's Eve.
I'd essentially planned a lot of, holiday features to run, and a lot of people had left town. And I got up in the morning and the sky was dark, really dark, and the rain was really coming down. Like it was really pounding. You could hear it.
Tamsin figured it would be a slow news day. And even when the wind started to pick up, she didn't think too much of it.
I didn't really think it was an emergency, but then I started to get these alerts on my phone from police, from city, from county officials, press releases saying this road is closed because of a landslide. There's a flooding risk. We're going to do evacuation warnings that were upgraded into evacuation orders. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this is really terrible. Like we need to get on this. But it was kind of just me at that point.
The storm continued to build. The alerts kept coming in. So the next day, Tamsin started making some calls.
The first person I called was our photographer, Kevin, because he will go to any assignment anywhere, regardless of how dangerous that might be.
Photojournalist Kevin Painshot has covered wildfires, protests, and severe thunderstorms over the years.
There wasn't a question of, if I'm going to be working on it. It was like, yeah, of course I'm going to be working. And so I just kind of went out there and just kept her up to date with what I was doing and what I saw, send images and give her an oral breakdown of what I saw and the damage that I saw so that she could write it up.
So when you're out doing this type of coverage, do you have a go bag in your car? Do you have bottled water? Do you have extra batteries? Talk about your preparation.
So when I go into any storm situation, I of course bring my boots that are about knee high, and I have waterproof pants and waterproof jacket, and then I have rain gear for my cameras. And then of course I bring a lot of water and always bring snacks, granola bars, stuff like that, because I know that most of the time I'm going to be out there for a majority of the day, and I bring anything I can just to sustain myself for the day.
Over the next few days, winds started to reach 60 miles per hour. Wi-Fi and power lines were going down all across the county, and Kevin had to figure out how to get his photos to Tamsin.
Electricity was out everywhere. Communication was kind of non-existent, except for, texts. And so I would shoot, pull over, process, download the photos in my phone, and then send them that way.
It wasn't long before Tamsin reached out to the rest of the staff, asking for more help.
And so Max Chun, our general assignment reporter, jumped in along with myself and Kevin to help report that coverage.
We spoke to law enforcement agencies. We spoke to the cities and counties when possible. I mean, they were obviously swamped as well.
Max Chun, Lookout's general assignment reporter, hit the ground running.
It was really just getting stuff out as much as possible and getting stuff from the National Weather Service and the local agencies of just like, here are places you can get sandbags, or here are places that will be open for shelter. Like, here's the path the storm we think is going to take.
As businesses near the Lookout office shuttered their windows and loaded sandbags, Max and Tamsin wanted to get information to people faster than just publishing stories on their website. So they launched a rolling live blog where they continually posted updates and bits of information.
I was like, how do I build a blog? I've never built a blog before, but the beautiful thing about doing digital journalism, being a startup, is you don't necessarily have to have a playbook for everything. You just have to try and kind of figure it out as you go. So I just opened a story and called it a blog and just started to post information. And actually readers were writing in saying, hey, can you add timestamps? I really want to know how old this information is, which I thought was great.
A lot of it was working the phones, calling the emergency services, calling the cities and counties to sort of get a feel of the preparations and what people could do, because this type of storm had not been seen in quite some time.
And it wasn't just one big storm that came and left. Between late December and March, storm after storm battered the area, affecting nearly everyone in the county. Near the sea, up in the redwood forest, in the farmlands to the south, waterlogged soil created landslides. Trees toppled over roads, and seaside cliffs just washed away. Those first days of coverage turned into weeks of diligent reporting and communicating with residents throughout the county. In downtown Santa Cruz, the Lookout office became Command Central, where reports were edited, fact-checked, and published as fast as the team could work.
We had a lot of documents flying around. And if somebody was writing out in the field, somebody would share a document with us that would go through and edit as quickly as possible. If there was something that needed to be checked on or another call that needed to be made, I would do that, or the most available person would do that and get it into shape for a blog or a story, depending on, we'd kind of have to make a snap decision on where it would fit best.
On top of posting stories on their blog, Max started sending text updates to readers who had opted in for breaking news alerts. The texts included links to news stories with critical information about things like evacuation notices, hotels with open rooms, and road closures caused by landslides.
So I sent out a text message that reads, Wednesday closes out with road closures, power outages, and dwindling shelter space. Though there may not be as much rain as initially expected, showers and high winds are still expected through Thursday afternoon. Tap the links below for the latest coverage. And then the next morning, somebody sent me a message back saying, you are the only news that we can get. Landline's out, power is out. Having our constant email and text alerts and social media alerts, people could engage in a way that they can't necessarily do with just a story that you publish on your website. And this made me feel like, we were really giving a public service. We were really reaching people in a way that really only we could at that time. And that was a big deal, I think, for us.
Lookout's reporters covered pretty much every corner of the county. One was focused on the damage done to the city's iconic beachfront restaurants. Another was covering unhoused residents and the ongoing crisis at shelters. Others were fanned out over the more rural parts of the county, where flood and mudslide damage was wreaking havoc on people's lives.
I just went knocking door to door in mud.
Hillary Ojeda is an education reporter at Lookout Santa Cruz. But when storms like this hit, there's only one beat: disaster coverage.
Really, really thick mud, and just some people let me into their homes, and I could just see, the water level really, really high.
In addition to knocking on doors and wading through flood zones, Hillary also attended a forum hosted by a local nonprofit. The meeting was organized to help people figure out how to file insurance claims for storm damage.
This was at a community center, and so I just was asking around, for folks who would be interested in sharing their experiences. And someone pointed me to Benjamin Short.
Benjamin Short lives in Lompico, a remote mountain community about 12 miles from downtown Santa Cruz. To get to this meeting, he dodged fallen redwood trees while making the treacherous drive down steep, windy roads. Hillary sat with Benjamin and asked him if she could record their conversation.
Is your house red tagged?
My house is red tagged. The house has a series of retaining walls holding it up, and they all collapsed. Half of my septic tank fell down the edge. The main part of the tank is still there, but the pumping station is I don't want that to fall. I don't want a bunch of sewage to fall in my neighborhood.
Did anything happen this past couple of days?
We've had constant road closures, roads collapsing. We've been stuck in several times without a way out of Lompico. The power has been out most of the time since New Year's, and when the power goes out, the internet goes out, Comcast goes out soon after that. We've had significant outages with the landlines, so
Since New Year's Eve,
it's been hell. Yeah, I'm sleeping with car keys and wallet and cell phone in my pants just in case anything crazy happens and I need to sprint out of there. All I really want to do is curl up in a ball and sob. But I've been kind of just focusing on the day to day and trying to save my house and trying to manage the slide as best I can and keep it covered.
A few days later, Hillary decided to brave the steep drive up to Ben's house in the mountains.
There were still storms coming, and I wasn't sure if I was going to have service. And there were still big rocks in the road. So at any moment, I thought the soil is so saturated, any of these redwoods could come down. Like they're at their breaking point after all of this wind, all of this saturation, and there weren't that many cars on the road. So it felt odd to be going up there. Definitely a little scary.
For Hillary, it was worth the risk. Ben says that Hillary was one of the only reporters covering his community at that time, and that, after Hillary published her article about him, he met other neighbors facing similar challenges. He says that her coverage helped inspire him and his neighbors to organize community meetings, and local politicians are now more aware of the infrastructure challenges in the area.
In these kinds of environmental disasters, you have to go out, you have to drive around in questionable areas. It's much more important to get the information out there in many different ways. And so I tried to go where we thought the people were most impacted.
This was vital to Lookout's mission, paying close attention to communities that were going unnoticed by larger legacy media groups and regional papers. Between December 31st, 2022 and mid-January 2023, there were 9 atmospheric rivers, belts of intense moisture that moved over the area, and heavy rains persisted until mid-March. During those 4 months, Santa Cruz experienced more rainfall than they had in any other 4-month period in over 100 years. And Lookout continued to cover these stories for months.
And it was just relentless, just nonstop, for 3 months.
Lookout photojournalist Kevin Painshad.
There would literally be 1 to 3 day break in between them, and then the next one comes hammering in. And you never knew how bad it's going to be. You just roll your eyes and you're like, oh my God, is this ever going to end?
If you're enjoying this podcast, you'll also like our Pulitzer on the Road live events. Our next event features an upcoming podcast guest, Justin Chang. Justin is the 2024 Pulitzer winner in criticism, and he'll be on stage with 2-time Pulitzer winner Wesley Morris of the New York Times, 2023 finalist Lindsay C. Green of the Detroit Free Press, and Pulitzer board member Jelani Cobb. The event is on Wednesday, March 26th at the iconic Michigan Central Station in Detroit, and it's free. Visit Pulitzer.org to get your tickets now. We hope to see you there. With so many storms and so much rain, many Santa Cruz residents couldn't just resume their regular lives. It became an ongoing battle to protect themselves and their property and to try to figure out how they might ever recover. Lookout's reporters stretched themselves thin to investigate why local officials didn't send evacuation notices and storm warnings in some areas sooner, why plans to relocate flood-prone communities had failed, and what the government was doing to protect its citizens against future storms, especially those already underserved communities.
Watsonville and Pajaro, those communities were devastated.
That's Hillary Ojeda again. Watsonville and Pajaro are 2 farming communities that sit side by side. Most of the people who live there are Spanish-speaking migrants. The 2 communities are divided by a river, and back in the 1940s, the state built a levee to help protect nearby farms from flooding. That levee had never been updated in the nearly 80 years since it was built. so it wasn't shocking when the levee breached after so much rain. Hillary, one of the only Spanish speakers on the Lookout staff, drove down to Pajaro and Watsonville with photojournalist Kevin Painshod to assess the damage.
We went down not knowing what we were going to find, Kevin and I, and we went to the Watsonville side of the river, right next to the bridge, and there were just like dozens of people standing along the levee.
Standing up on the bridge above the levee, the crowd looked down at their flooded homes.
When the levee breached, it was Friday night into Saturday morning. Law enforcement, firefighters went door to door telling people they had to leave. A lot of people stayed, but the majority of folks left, and they were, running away from the water. And as the floodwaters came in, law enforcement sectioned off this town because the floodwaters stayed for days.
Officials wouldn't let them back into their homes.
They had medication in their homes. They had nowhere to stay. And as they're, Spanish speakers, and most of the material and announcements and news is in English, they didn't know where they could go for help. So their lives essentially stopped. These families, they had whatever they were able to take with them the night that they had left. So no clothes, essentially, just one pair of shoes maybe.
Until this moment, Hillary and Kevin didn't really know what the residents of Watsonville and Pajaro had been going through.
I couldn't believe that there was just absolutely no access for folks who had been evacuated. There were many families that were experiencing things like this. There are Spanish speakers, and news organizations here were stretched very thin, and there's not many Spanish-speaking journalists.
When we visited almost 2 years after the storms, Hillary and Kevin took us to the very spot where the levee breached. And I think when some people picture a levee, they might picture these massive concrete walls or something like that. But this levee looks like a pile of soil and rocks. And it's hard to imagine that it's expected to protect people from massive amounts of water.
That's where the water started, and it literally just went as far as the eye can see. It was all just water.
How did you get around? Hillary and Kevin introduced us to Norma and Rafael. When they were evacuated from their mobile home, they didn't have a lot of options.
They were staying with family members. Norma, she and her family were staying at her brother's when we met with them, and there was 17 people in one apartment.
Even now, as we talk to them almost 2 years later, they still can't live in their home because of all the destruction.
He says, at first it was really difficult. They were really impacted, the kids. And so they didn't go to school for maybe 15 days. And so, they went to school and they were just totally disoriented. Her daughter was crying a lot in school because she was worried that if it flooded, if there was another flood, her mom was going to be too far away to reach her.
After the levee breached, officials said that roughly 2,000 people were evacuated from the Pajaro Valley. In many ways, this area is a microcosm of all the system failures that occurred during the storms. There was the failure to anticipate. Since 1963, the levee has been deemed unable to provide adequate protection. The U.S. Army Corps has been drafting and redrafting plans for reconstruction, but nothing has actually been fixed. There was the failure to notify residents of evacuations in time for them to pack everything they'd need. And lastly, there was neglect. While so much of the government recovery efforts focused on the wealthier coastline neighborhoods, many Pajaro residents were left to fend for themselves, pleading, often to little avail, for resources from local nonprofits and church groups. In the aftermath of their reporting, having seen up close just how neglected the needs of migrants are within the larger Santa Cruz County, Lookout has launched a fellowship for Spanish-speaking reporters to exclusively cover these communities. Did any other reporters reach out to you? Did you talk to anybody else in the media?
¿Hablaron con otros periodistas?
No, nomás con ustedes.
Just with us.
Did it make a difference, do you think, to the area that Lookout and Hillary and Kevin wrote about and took photos of what was happening? Did it help?
¿Crees que nuestros artículos que escribimos sobre lo que pasó aquí les ayudó?
Bastante. Bastante.
Bastante. Bastante. A lot. A lot. In what way?
¿Cómo?
a que no se escuchara otra gente. ¿Sí me entiende?
Well, he said, of course, just putting eyes on this community and so that people could hear us and listen to us, so that people could see what happened to us and so that the government could help.
It can be hard to tell if your reporting has made a direct impact. But we do know that today, roughly 2 years after Lookout was one of the only outlets to report deeply on the destroyed levees in Watsonville and Pajaro, public pressure appears to be resulting in action. Chris Neely is Lookout's policy reporter.
The Army Corps of Engineers and the Pajaro Regional Flood Management Agency, which is kind of the overarching agency between governments down there, they broke ground on what is going to be a several-year levee reconstruction project that is going to be built to much better standards and is going to provide way greater protection for the residents down there and the farmland. So there is movement on that. No one's saying, yeah, well, we read that Lookout story and now we're going to do this thing. But I think over time, regular pressure and also officials, decision makers, knowing that we're going to be on a story has its own influence.
As climate change gets worse, local governments across the U.S. are trying to figure out how to prepare for future disasters. And Lookout's influence is not just local. Santa Cruz has really diverse terrain and geography. That means the county is vulnerable to a lot of different kinds of environmental disasters. Storms, mudslides, wildfires, you name it. So Santa Cruz has become kind of a test case for addressing climate change. What's happening there is influencing conversations in other communities. The impact of Lookout's reporting is undeniable, and it was an important aspect of its Pulitzer consideration. But what they achieved went far deeper than the reporting on systemic failures.
We knew that it was really important to not just tell the kind of government story. It's not a government versus storms, it's people versus storms, but it is ultimately people who are dealing with these things. And as we reported, dealing with it in incredibly different and diverse ways.
For the reporters at Lookout, their work is about and for the people of Santa Cruz. The outstanding effect of Lookout's work was that it operated on every level at once, as news, as public service, and as a kind of emergency glue that bound a community together and offered hope in the midst of despair. Alongside almost every explainer of the forces unleashed by climate change was a story of resilience in the face of those forces. Neighbors drinking beer in a generator-powered bar to keep a business afloat. Neighbors pitching in to repair each other's roofs. Neighbors driving buses through dangerous mountain passes to help evacuate assisted living communities. In some cases, the stories of neighbors helping neighbors inspired even more connection, the kind of change that isn't evident in legislation or levees being built, but is no less meaningful. Take Benjamin Short, for example. He's the guy who slept with his keys and wallet in his pockets after his mountain home was red tagged.
It kind of changed. It looks like a construction site now. Before that, it just looked like a weird gully cliff.
Benjamin's still repairing the damages on his property that were caused by the storms. But there have been some silver linings for him.
After she wrote her story, a neighbor who lives up the hill said, "Oh my gosh, this poor man's in this horrible situation. Like, I just want to do something, anything." And so she found me on Nextdoor and just said, I'm living up here with my son, and I know you're having a difficult time. Can I cook you a nice, warm, homemade meal? I know your plumbing's all messed up. And I was like, that would be wonderful, thank you. And so she brought me a lovely, delicious, home-cooked meal, and we fell in love. And she's the love of my life, and we're engaged.
Hillary, how does it feel to hear that story?
I couldn't believe it. And, as a reporter, you always hope for policy change. You just never imagine that someone will find love and get engaged on the story that you wrote. Yeah, it was really great to hear. Super happy for him, and it was quite a surprise.
Months after that stormy New Year's Eve, Tamsin McMahon decided to submit Lookout's work for a Pulitzer Prize in breaking news. She didn't tell anyone on her team. She figured it was a long shot, but she was so proud of what they'd done, she thought, why not? And in the spring of 2024, she sent a message to her newsroom.
We got a Slack message from Tamsin McMahon, who is a very sober Canadian. She does not show a lot of emotion. She said, mandatory meeting at 10 a.m. tomorrow. which is not something you want to hear in the journalism industry. This is a mandatory meeting with no other context. That sends chills down your spine.
My colleagues and I had like a group text that we were messaging, and we were like, what could this possibly be? Like, she's never this insistent on the news meeting.
Chris joked that it was a Pulitzer or Nobel or something.
I said out loud, oh, maybe it's a Pulitzer, but then immediately I was like, why did I even say that out loud? I'm just going to be disappointed tomorrow when it's not the Pulitzer, because it's not the Pulitzer. Like, there's no way.
Once everyone was on the screens, Tamsin could just not contain her smile. She was just like beaming. She just said it. We won a Pulitzer.
And there's just like dead silence for like, I don't know, a couple of seconds. And everyone's just like, you're going to need to run that by me one more time.
Everyone is just hugging. I mean, I was so excited.
I think I started crying immediately. I think Kevin did too.
I had so many emotions of feeling just so honored to be a part of some of the greatest journalists like ever to exist, and to be a part of that was just unbelievable.
We were just in shock. I definitely didn't expect it. Definitely like years of folks just generally not understanding why you would do this job. But it's a really great validation that I would never imagine getting.
I felt for the first time like really see like my stuff that I do, it does matter, and it's being seen. I can never thank Tamsin enough for submitting us for the award.
Days after learning about their win, the Lookout team held a celebration at their office. They invited their readers to join the party, and over 100 community members showed up. For Tamsin McMahon, who spent day after day and night after night directing coverage, the 2024 Pulitzer for Breaking News is an amazing recognition of her team's dedication. But she knows their work's not done.
What was important was for us to continue to go back and to continue to cover, like, hey, this is the storm. There was an emergency. People left their homes. They went to a hotel or a shelter. But then what happens to them in the months and years after that?
Recently, in December of 2024, record-breaking swells tore off a massive chunk of Santa Cruz's iconic wharf. The wharf is a long stretch of pier that's home to some of the city's most beloved shops, eateries, and vistas. Lookout reporters have been covering the story, reminding us, yet again, that these climate threats are not going away.
There are people living on the edge, and they've lost their housing, and they've been pushed out. And there's really very little shelter system, and the government hadn't really had to pay attention to it before this, and now they are.
Lookout was just over 2 years old when they did the reporting that won them a Pulitzer. Since then, Lookout's average monthly page views have increased by about 50%. By any measure, they're a success story. But like Santa Cruz itself, they are also a test case, a beacon in a larger ongoing crisis. More than half of the country has limited or no access to local news. In the last 20 years, the U.S. has lost close to 3,000 newspapers, and yet we know that a vibrant local press is critical to public safety and to democracy. Local newsrooms like Lookout Santa Cruz provide crucial services. This year, Lookout is launching another office in Eugene, Oregon. Lookout's founder, Ken Doctor, promises that like Lookout Santa Cruz, Lookout Eugene will be robust, trustworthy, and community-oriented. He also hopes to open in other locations. And with each new news site, another community becomes more equipped with critical information to help them face the unknown. I hope that, as we move forward, all who care about well-informed communities and credible local newsrooms, the readers, the funders, the community leaders, will continue to support the tireless work of their local journalists in towns and cities across the U.S. That's it for this episode of Pulitzer on the Road. Thank you to the staff of Lookout Santa Cruz, the 2024 Pulitzer Prize Breaking News winners. A special thank you to Ken Doctor, Tamsin McMahon, Max Chun, Hillary Ojeda, Kevin Painshad, Christopher Neely, Benjamin Short, Norma and Raphael, Wallace Bain, Lily Belly, and Josh Whitby for taking the time to talk with us. For more details about this work and the work of all Pulitzer winners, please visit our website at www.pulitzer.org. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you get your podcasts. Pulitzer on the Road is a production of the Pulitzer Prize Board and is produced by Odyssey's Pineapple Street Studios. This show is hosted by me, Nicole Carroll. This episode was produced by Maria Lexa Kavanaugh. Our senior producer is Justine Dom. Our executive editor is Joel Lovell. The head of sound and engineering at Pineapple Street is Raj Makija. This episode was mixed by Marina Pais, with additional audio engineering by Pedro Alvira. Music licensing by APM and Epidemic Sound. Editing, promotion, and other support by Pamela Casey, Edward Clement, and Sean Murphy. Barry Finkel and Marjorie Miller are our executive producers.